All right, guys, so I got a little bit of wild breaking news here for y'all because Trump's strategy of moving fast and breaking everything in sight in an effort to bring federal government agencies to their knees is coming to fruition as Medicaid portals throughout the entire country, all 50 states, have just been effectively shut down amidst this memo that the Trump administration put out calling for a temporary funding freeze on essentially all federal government loans and grants. And we'll get to more details in terms of the insanity of what exactly the Trump administration is demanding of these federal agencies here in a second. But just a little bit more on this Medicaid situation. They say Medicaid reimbursement portals were down on Tuesday in all 50 states on the heels of a funding freeze that was ordered by the Trump administration. Senator Chris Murphy, a Connecticut Democrat, separately said that his state's Medicaid payment system had been turned off, saying that doctors and hospitals cannot get paid, and discussions are ongoing about whether or not services can continue. Keep in mind, there are, as they point out here, 72 million Americans who rely on Medicaid for their healthcare services, in addition to providing healthcare to primarily low-income people. They also provide services to pregnant women, the elderly, and people with disabilities. And as I point out, Medicaid is jointly funded by the federal government and states. So this is coming on the heels of this memo that was just issued by the Trump administration. So a little bit of details on what exactly they're trying to demand. They say a memo from the White House Budget Office is calling for a spending freeze on federal assistance by 5 p.m. Tuesday, today, which could affect everything from aid to nonprofits, universities, small business loans, and state and local government grants. And that's really just scratching the surface in terms of what this has impacted so far. They say that the freeze could have wide-ranging implications, with the White House noting that $3 trillion was spent in 2024 on federal assistance programs. So the White House press secretary, we'll hear more from her here in a second, Caroline Leavitt, said Tuesday that this is a temporary pause to make sure that these organizations are not conflicting with President Trump's executive actions and orders. So let's simplify this for a second. Essentially what the Trump administration is doing here is he is trying to steal the power of the purse from Congress. That's what he's doing here, right? He is trying to consolidate more power into his own hands, into the office of the presidency, and essentially saying, even though Congress passed certain funding measures and then it was signed into law, I, your God King president, can just simply override that. That's what's happening here. It's brazenly illegal and unconstitutional. We'll get to more of that here in a minute. So they say that the Monday night memo from the Office of Management and Budget, the OMB, is directing federal agencies to assess compliance with Mr. Trump's executive orders, specifically targeting, quote, DEI, woke gender ideology, and the Green New Deal. Whatever the fuck that means. As they say, it does not give specifics on what these policies refer to, especially since the Green New Deal, a policy that was promoted by AOC and Bernie Sanders, never by Joe Biden in any way, shape, or form, it was never signed into law. So Trump has been waging war on a non-existent villain, the Green New Deal, which, by the way, is something that we should pass. We're talking about a massive infrastructure investment, a jobs program, addressing climate change, the greatest threat that human civilization is facing right now. And he's saying, even though that hasn't actually been passed into law, I'm going to fight that ghost anyways. They continue. It gets even wilder from here. The use of federal resources to advance Marxist equity, transgenderism, and Green New Deal social engineering policies is a waste of taxpayer dollars that does not improve the day-to-day lives of those that we serve, according to this memo. So we're doing like a widespread federal government funding pause, which he does not have the authority to do, in order to fight Marxist equity, transgenderism, and the Green New Deal. That's what's going on right now, guys. So in terms of some of the other impacts here, they say that Head Start, which provides preschool funding for low-income children, said that the memo has the potential to severely disrupt the ability for Head Start programs to serve 800,000 children and their families nationwide. So we're taking food out of the mouths of American children. Now, if you wanted an update on how conservatives feel about that specifically. Maybe you say, oh, well, that wasn't the intention or whatever the case may be. Here we have a clip that just dropped here from CNN today, where this reporter, Pamela Brown, was talking to Representative Rich McCormick and asked about free school lunches and what he thinks about that. Let's go ahead and check in with the Republican mindset as of today.
I mean, how many people got their start in fast food restaurants when they were kids versus just giving a blanket rule that gives all kids lunches in high school who are capable of going out and actually getting a job and doing something that makes them have value, thinking about their future instead of thinking about how they're going to sponge out the government when they don't need to. We don't give people value. We don't give them the ability to dig themselves out when we penalize them for actually working and actually keep them on welfare. That's what's been the inner city problem for a very long time. We need to have a top-down review so we can get people out of poverty, because you know what? America's very good at creating jobs and giving people worth. And we.
Okay, as the note down here points out, this isn't even just about like upper high school students who could potentially go get a job at Chick-fil-A or whatever. We're talking about literal children here, guys, including much younger students who actually legally cannot go out and get jobs. And he's talking about taking the food out of their mouths, right? Preventing them from getting access to free school meals because he wants them to, I don't know, go work in the mines or something. Is that what we're talking about here? He says they're capable of going out and getting a job instead of sponging off the government. Talking about children here, guys. Hungry children. This is where the Republican Party is at right now. They continue in this CBS News article saying that Meals on Wheels said Tuesday that they are trying to figure out how this affects them. If, in fact, this order includes the Older Americans Act, then this would presumably halt service to millions of vulnerable seniors who have no other means of purchasing or preparing meals. So we're taking food out of the mouths of children as well as seniors. They continue from pausing research on cures for childhood cancer to closing homeless shelters, halting food assistance, reducing safety from domestic violence, and shutting down suicide hotlines. The impact of even a short pause in funding could be devastating and cost lives. They say this order could decimate thousands of organizations and leave neighbors without the services that they need. They continue down here because there's already legal challenges that are being fired. They say as of Tuesday afternoon today, a nonprofit coalition, including the National Council of Nonprofits and the American Public Health Association, had already filed a legal challenge asking a federal judge for an emergency order to block the institution of the memo. This is brazenly illegal, guys. The Impoundment Control Act, 1974 law that lays out the framework for the president's ability to freeze certain funds appropriated by Congress. So, again, essentially what we have here is Trump's incoming Project 2025 co-author and his appointment for the Office of Management and Budget, Russ Vought, alongside Trump, saying Congress doesn't get to decide funding, essentially. I get to decide that unilaterally as the president, and if they don't fit in with my ideological goals, then I am going to withhold funding from them. That's what they're saying here, guys. It's a complete, illegal, unconstitutional power grab. Ryan Grimm follows up on that. He says, again, this is not legal. It is not within the president's discretion to block funding that has been appropriated and directed by Congress. The president can veto spending bills, but once it's signed into law, it's law. Right. So, I mean, if Congress passed some sort of spending measure under the current Trump administration and it got to his desk, he could veto that. But you can't just go around rescinding funding unilaterally as the president that has already been signed into law. But this is part of, again, Trump's push to consolidate power in the hands of the executive branch. We also have here from Sam Stein saying that one person he talked to, not a lawmaker, said that this is real and a potential crisis unless it's fixed. Medicaid providers will not be able to get paid. Payrolls will be missed. Red states, ironically, will be hit the hardest as they get a bigger percentage of Medicaid funds. So Trump sort of already materially harming the people who voted for him. We also have here, as pointed out by AOC, that 41% of all births in the U.S. are covered by Medicaid. Overnight, Republicans are destroying health care for millions of Americans, and it isn't just Trump. Republican majorities in the House and the Senate are backing this illegal sabotage. They are all in on it, every one, and she's not wrong there. Now, we also had this post here from Jeff Stein, who's been tracking all of this pretty closely, and he's doing a side-by-side comparison of the Office of Management and Budget's memo from yesterday the one they initially put out, versus what they are saying today as they're sort of trying to clean up the mess that they made. So this is what they said yesterday. To implement these orders, each agency, so we're talking about all of the agencies, must complete a comprehensive analysis of all of their federal financial assistance programs to identify programs, projects, and activities that may be implicated by any of the president's executive orders. In the interim, to the extent permissible under applicable law, federal agencies must temporarily pause all activities related to obligation or disbursement of all federal financial assistance. Now, this is what they then went on to say the next day after they were asked a question: is this a freeze on all federal financial assistance? Which seems, if I'm reading this correctly, to be explicitly what they were just calling for. And their answer was no. The pause does not apply across the board. Isn't that what you were just saying? It is expressly limited to programs, projects, and activities implicated by the president's executive orders, again, such as ending DEI, the Green New Deal, which hasn't fucking been passed. So what are you talking about? What are we doing here, guys? The Green New Deal has not been enacted into law. This is just nonsense. I mean, and also funding non-governmental organizations that undermine the national interest. What does that actually mean? What does that mean? Undermining national interest. Can you be more specific? When you're talking about pulling funding from entire non-governmental organizations as well as federal agencies, like, what are we talking about here? They're being as vague as they can possibly be. Now, we also had here on Fox News, we had a press briefing. I think this is the first one that we've gotten from the Trump White House. And this is his, again, Caroline Leavitt, spokeswoman, who was pressed about this, right? What are people supposed to do? What are organizations that rely on federal funding supposed to do? And she basically said, just call up Russ Vought and make a case that you deserve the funding, I guess.
Is the Trump administration recommending that organizations that rely on federal funding make payroll, pay their rent in the meantime?
It is a temporary pause, and the Office of Management and Budget is reviewing the federal funding that has been going out the door. Again, not for individual assistance, but for all of these other programs that I mentioned. I also spoke with the incoming director of OMB this morning, and he told me to tell all of you that the line to his office is open for other federal government agencies across the board. And if they feel that programs are necessary and in line with the president's agenda, then the Office of Management and Budget will review those policies.
I mean, again, she's literally just saying, call up Russ Vought, I guess, and ask him to please continue to fund you because you are ideologically committed to the MAGA movement, I guess. Now, in the meantime, because right now you have an acting OMB director, right? Because Trump's Russ Vought nomination or nominee hasn't gone through the entire nomination process, so he hasn't been approved yet for the position, right? And now you have Democrats who are saying delay the committee vote on the incoming budget chief, which, yeah, I mean, I don't know, maybe we should prepare some questions about what exactly his thoughts are on this kind of shutdown of Medicaid and other essential services that millions and millions of Americans rely on. Will they be successful in this? I don't know. Is this guy going to, be approved for the position anyways? Definitely possible. Listen, Republicans have a majority. So, there's pretty limited pushback that I expect is going to come from Democrats, especially given what we've seen so far in the previous hearings. We also had to hear from Jeff Stein, an article that he published last June of 2024. So again, this didn't come out of nowhere, right? This is Project 2025. That is kind of what this is laying out. And also more specific to Trump and his plan to claim sweeping powers to cancel federal government spending. His byline here was, in a second term, allies said that the former president would look at unilateral funding cuts for the World Health Organization and green energy initiatives. So, we could have seen this on the horizon last year as well. Not something that was really surprising. This is kind of what he ran on doing. So there's that aspect of it. Now we have Chuck Schumer, put this on 1.25 times speed, chiming in here to give his thoughts on it. The aging and decrepit Senate leadership in action here.
Last night, President Trump plunged the country into chaos. Without a shred of warning, the Trump administration announced a halt to virtually all federal funds across the country. In an instant, Donald Trump has shut off billions, perhaps trillions of dollars that directly support states, cities, towns, schools, hospitals, small businesses, and most of all, American families. This is a dagger at the heart of the average American family in red states, in blue states, in cities, in suburbs, in rural areas. It is just outrageous. Funds for things like disaster assistance, local law enforcement, rural hospitals, aid to the elderly, food for people in need, all are on the chopping block in this new administration.
All right, so I mean, there you go. He's not wrong. And he goes on to describe how this is brazenly illegal and unconstitutional. He's not wrong, but you know, it would be nice if we could get some Democratic leadership that isn't pushing 80 and you know, sort of on their way out. We also have this here from Crystal, which I think is an accurate point. She says it took a 2-page memo to throw disaster aid, Meals on Wheels, Head Start, care for homeless veterans, Medicaid payments, and vastly more into destructive chaos. It's true that Republicans are more willing to wield power when they have it, even when their moves are wildly illegal. But it's also just way easier to destroy things and tear them down than to build capacity and successful government programs. And she's right. I mean, this is part of the conservative, you know, agenda. And I'm not just talking about Republicans, but many neoliberal Democrats as well, is there's been a decades-long strategy to try to make government programs inefficient, to make them more costly, to try to push them towards eventual privatization, to make it look as though the government cannot possibly do anything right. And it's an intentional strategy because, again, their end goal is to privatize many of these things. They're pretty open about that. And it, as she points out here, is a lot more difficult to build successful programs than it is to rip them apart, to tear them down, to corrupt them, to, you know, smear them in whatever ways you possibly can. And so this is the conservative wrecking ball strategy, right? Now, at the same time that all of this is happening, as a broader part of him trying to attack every federal government agency that he possibly can outside of, I guess, the Pentagon and, you know, aid to Israel, which always gets an exception. We also have Trump going on the offensive against the existence of the National Labor Relations Board. Now, keep in mind, with all of my various critiques of Joe Biden and his administration, this was one of the very few and far between bright spots, was his National Labor Relations Board. Trump is taking a hatchet to it. So he's already fired Abruzzo as well as another top member of the board in what, again, is a completely illegal move that he's intentionally doing because I think he wants to bring up basically the constitutionality of the existence of the National Labor Relations Board to the Supreme Court. I think that's what he's trying to do here. He's trying to set up a legal battle that can make it up to the Supreme Court, and then the people who he installed in the Supreme Court can basically destroy the NLRB. I think that that's the goal of what's going on here. I mean, keep in mind, the NLRB's purpose is to defend workers' rights, to make sure that corporations in this country don't just get complete, unchecked, free reign to abuse workers, to lack safety measures, to steal money from them. It's to protect workers' rights to organize into labor unions. And here goes anti-worker, anti-union Trump stepping in to do this. They say it wasn't a surprise when President Trump fired the NLRB general counsel, Jennifer Abruzzo, on Monday. She was a Biden appointee who used the agency to expand workers' rights. So he went further than that, though. I think he has a right to fire the general counsel. But he went further, also firing the Democratic board member, Gwyn Wilcox, in an unprecedented move that will be met with a legal fight. So due to existing vacancies, Wilcox's ouster leaves the board with just 2 members, short of the quorum that it needs to adjudicate even routine cases. So when the board is fully staffed, they have 5 members. There are now currently 2, which means that essentially as we speak, the NLRB is not capable of doing anything, meaning they are not able at the moment to bring any sort of cases against corporations who are union busting, illegally union busting, who are abusing workers, who are stealing from workers, whatever the case may be. The NLRB has effectively been shut down by Donald Trump. They say with this move, Trump has effectively shut down the NLRB's operations, leaving workers it defends on their own. according to the AFL-CIO president, Liz Schuler. She also says that these moves will make it easier for bosses to violate the law and to trample on workers' legal rights on the job and the fundamental freedom to organize. So wouldn't put it past the Supreme Court to potentially take this up, or even a lower court to take this up and decide with Trump and to potentially destroy the NLRB, right? You would hope that the previous rulings would stand, but really everything's on the chopping block now. Everything's on the chopping block now. And shouldn't be surprising given what we know about Donald Trump. Obviously, we covered this story at the time in August of last year. Trump and Musk discussed firing striking workers. The UAW is now seeking an NLRB investigation. So Musk and other, CEOs and billionaires have been pushing for this kind of a legal battle to take place. Musk has openly talked about how he thinks essentially the NLRB shouldn't exist and that, it should be dismantled. We also had Trump's rally, if you guys remember, when the UAW members were on strike. And he went to a non-union plant, right? Because he was sort of at the time trying to do like a tit for tat with Biden, because Biden went out on one of these picket lines, and he went to a non-unionized plant. While he was supposedly trying to give off the image that he was standing with workers, he was actually going to a non-union plant while the UAW was on strike. I'm pretty sure he was attacking Sean Fain and the UAW as a union at this rally. And of course, Sean Fain pushed back and said it's a pathetic irony. Now, at the same time that he is attacking Medicaid and, Head Start programs and the NLRB, we also have him going after the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, as pointed out here by, I believe this is the New York Times. He is stocking the EPA with predictably oil, gas, and chemical lobbyists. Oil, gas, and chemical lobbyists to lead the Environmental Protection Agency. What do you guys think is the incentive for oil and gas and chemical lobbyists in regards to protecting the environment? Their entire existence as these kinds of lobbyists is predicated on continuing to destroy the environment. These are the people who he's putting in top positions in these kinds of government agencies. Again, not a shocker when you look into Trump's corrupt dealings. If you guys remember this story back from last year as Trump was on the campaign trail, he straight up at an event with fossil fuel CEOs asked them for $1 billion. And in exchange, he said, I'm going to get rid of the electric vehicle mandates and I'm going to get rid of all of, Biden's climate executive orders and all of his actions. And we're going to drill, baby, drill. I mean, how is this legal in anything, remotely close to a democracy? You want to call yourself a democracy? And then you're allowing politicians to run around to CEOs asking them for $1 billion in exchange for eviscerating any sort of chance at fighting climate change? It's just a direct quid pro quo. This is the kind of legalized corruption and bribery that we have here in the United States. This is not a democracy. This is an oligarchy. That's what this is. Or it's a kleptocracy or whatever you want to call it now. I mean, Trump's administration has been fully stocked with billionaires, with donors, with CEOs, with Wall Street ghouls. This is who Trump is. So, I mean, keep this in mind as we move forward. He's going full wrecking ball strategy. And the purpose of it, even though it's chaotic and it feels like it's overwhelming right now, the purpose of it is very clear. Trump's presidency exists to serve the interests of the wealthy, of the elite, at the expense of average working class people.
Politic guy has the best politics. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying